cities on their way down. They've got a couple of copies that I've asked to be made, and then they will be here. John, pursuant to our conversations, and I know you have a proposal that we'll be talking about first this morning, so that'll be the first order of business. So show us in kind of informal recess till their team gets down here. And John, I can talk to you on something.
I'm on the way. Just really come to watch the show.
You could use a big box of frozen munchkins.
Popcorn out here or something?
In mediations, I always bring food. It's hard for someone to get too mad at you when they're eating your donuts and stuff.
That's right. Mr. Director. How you doing, Jeff?
Hey, John.
See you doing.
John, how you doing today?
Okay, guys.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hey, John.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you for being here. We had a slight rain delay. A couple of things that I think are critically important. First of all, about 7 o'clock this morning, I got a call from my son, who is associated with my law firm, that they were on the way to the hospital for my granddaughter to arrive today. So she's 3 weeks early. So my other son is currently over there putting together the car seat that they thought they had three weeks to do. So with that, I kind of warned people that there is some chance, and I called Chris this morning and I called John this morning and I told them I was going to be here and proceed, but I'm going to be kind of following events, and if there were to be any, I don't intend to be here late. And I know, John, you have a confirmation of a granddaughter, and so I understand how important that is too. So we're going to work today and try to get this thing done in as timely a fashion as possible. A couple of things that I wanted to discuss before I ask you for your proposals. Just a couple of ideas I had that I want to bring out there. Number one, I wanted to talk about paragraph 8 in the proposal as presented. I'm sorry, I want to return to governance paragraph 8 for just a moment. That's the paragraph 8. If you remember, we had one issue that was still kind of laying out there undone, and I'd like to go back to the language that was contained in the original proposal, by the city, which really reflected, I believe, the task force recommendations on that. And I think, guys, if you want to go to the page, I believe that's on page 27, if you remember the package we had in front of us. And paragraph 8 was for the future administration of the JPFP. Upon selection of the next administrator, chief, investment officer, the aggregate compensation, et cetera, et cetera. I want to go to the point where all that's been agreed to.
And we've actually got some red line language that coming out of some of the last.
It came out of,
Yeah.
I understand that. But I want to go to the principal language we've been discussing for a moment and make sure that we're on the same place. About 1/2 of the way through the city's proposed language, the JPFP's current senior staff pension plan will be frozen as of the close of the pay period immediately preceding August 15th, 2014, and following that date, no further benefits will accrue under the senior staff pension plan. Now, is the city's proposal, and Chris, I'll turn this to you because I know you, is the city's proposal there that the plan as it applies will be closed, the plan that now exists would close on August 15, 2014 and no longer be available?
Correct.
The next sentence says benefits will be distributed to senior staff pension plan participants after closure of plan as if such participants had been enrolled in the Florida Retirement System Special Risk Plan or by the purchase of annuities as permitted by law. That deals with plan participants tell me where we are on that language and how that would affect.
Well, that's similar to language we had during the MSA and is the language the task force used. We had also, in our last round, added a sentence that said, for any senior staff pension plan beneficiaries who are currently JPFPF employees, benefits shall be distributed following the termination of employment. So you've essentially read the correct language. That was one addition that was also sort of mentioned in the last time we discussed number.
What I want to know here is if we froze this at the end of the sentence, no further benefits will accrue under the senior staff pension plan. Benefits will be distributed to senior staff pension participants after closure of the plan, period. What does that do, John?
The board's agreed to close the plan.
Right?
Put a period after, and the following date, no further benefits will accrue under the senior staff pension plan. Put a period, and that's the end of that.
Okay. And to be clear, at that point in time, then the plan would no longer exist and the parties would be in agreement that that plan has ceased to exist, and that's the only thing that accomplishes. Is that correct?
Closes the plan for accrual of benefits, yes.
With those questions, I throw this kind of to the city side for a moment. That accomplishes one of the principal goals you had from the outset, which was the closing of the senior staff pension plan, correct?
Right.
That has been a consistent goal in the MSA and through the task force process.
At least to that point in time, we have agreement that the board wants to close the plan or is willing to close the plan, the city wants the plan closed, and the plan would be closed. Do we have to have any further direction after that for purposes of reaching this agreement?
Let me ask a question, and John, you will know this better. Under the current senior staff plan, as I haven't read a plan summary description or anything like that, what are the provisions for distribution of the plan benefits? And obviously I know there's 3 people, 2 of whom are probably already receiving benefits because it's Mr. Covey's widow and one other person.
Correct.
How does the plan, how do the plan governing documents sort of manage the process of distributing benefits?
To those 2 individuals you spoke of?
Well, I mean, just in general, like how does it?
Pay them every 2 weeks.
Gotcha.
On the regular city pay dates.
And in your mind, to the extent the plan were closed, what would that mean for you as a beneficiary in the plan?
That would be up to the board. And that's another reason probably that you should, let's look at this a little bit more. You may want to take out the city and the JPFPF shall ensure that any future executive director administrator shall be placed in either the city or the general employees pension fund or defined pension contribution plan within the limits of federal law, which you
Yeah, that's already been agreed upon.
I know, but you may just want to take that out because that's solely within the province of the board. The board may want to say, we're just going to have Social Security and nothing else.
I thought that when we discussed that earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, the idea was for future, that was to give a broad base for the city and to try to tailor what they thought they needed to be competitive in the field of because we had raised, because the city had, and you have agreed to some significant increases in requirements.
To put it mildly, there may be some disagreement as to whether or not that is truly solely in the province of the board. So I just think we want to think carefully about.
Leave it in, leave it in.
Okay. I think that language was agreed to. I think that what we only do here is I want to know whether or not the parties could live with this paragraph 8 ending with under the senior staff pension plan, period, which means that the plan would be gone, the future of the incumbent would not be determined by this agreement as it related to retirement.
But again, I'm trying to, John, is there some, what I'm trying to understand a little better here is, if the plan is closed, in your mind, does that mean benefits are distributed? How does that mean benefits are distributed to you? The benefits that have accrued under the plan?
This doesn't say one way or the other, and I'd have to go back and look at the plan.
I think, if I may, I think the intent of what we're doing is saying that there'll be no further retirement benefits accruing into the plan, but that the distribution of the plan would be when you retire. That's the intent of the language. When they use the word close, I think to a professional like yourself, John, you see that as a technical closure of a plan that mandates certain things under federal law. And I think what the intent of the parties is that no further benefits are accruing, and that when you retire, you would start drawing the benefits that have accrued to date.
That's what you say on the last sentence.
Okay, is that?
What if we
I want to make sure we have a meeting of the minds, that we don't walk out here and...
I want to be very clear.
It's, I don't want to get people, it's the last sentence.
Yes, that's the issue.
But it's there, it's already there, it's covered.
No, but I'm saying...
It wasn't just in there just now.
No,
with
I'm
the
saying
edit.
what occurs and what would the parties do if we were to stop the sentence under the senior staff pension plan, which basically would provide, I guess, that whatever turns out to be the method by which the senior staff pension plan, which I claim no expertise in, maybe Joe, maybe you guys know, whatever the plan for distribution, the fact of the matter is that whatever that plan of distribution is, we all know that it actually would only apply to one person. Now, that distribution plan, awkwardly, that we're negotiating here at the table applies to that one person who's here at the table.
Yes.
So that being the case, I'm just saying, does that question have to be resolved as part of the larger agreement between the parties? My suggestion is that both sides give some consideration to whether or not that has to be resolved in this setting. It may be that you believe it has to be, and if you do, then we should, and if it's incumbent on the parties to resolve that, then we have language in there that has not been agreed to yet, which is the last sentence. If the last sentence, then there's also, we had reached an agreement in the MSA, had we not, John?
Yes, sir.
Would the MSA language that was agreed to be acceptable? You may want to take a moment to look at that. But would the MSA, what I'm saying is what had previously been agreed to by the parties, would that be acceptable to the parties today as a way to move beyond that issue?
I'll let you know in just a minute as soon as my
Oh, yeah, I'm
assistant.
I don't even,
Yeah, so if
I'm not even requiring that answer to be immediate. I'm throwing that out there. We had an agreement that on the MSA, and I'm suggesting, could we go back to what you guys have previously agreed to and live with that, since we know we're all talking about one person. This happens to be, you.
Senator, my notes show that we said that we would use the MSA language. Is that what you're asking?
Well, that was a suggestion. I don't think, we have not done that. I'm just asking, I'm throwing out, because we are down to a
Look at the
very,
MSA language.
and I just want to know whether or not the parties are, if it would lead to agreement, whether the parties could agree to the MSA language.
well, I'm worried about that. Coming back to it.
Here would be my suggestion. You've given some excellent food for thought here. I know John's got another proposal he wants
Yeah.
to make. I think we can resolve
Okay.
this fairly quickly when we come back.
All
to
right,
our-
and I know that we're anxiously waiting, John, but I have one other issue I want to discuss before we get to that, because I think it's also critical, and I will tell you that and I'm going to have to do a little more redrafting, but I have looked at the provision number 9 that was provided as the task force recommendation. Provision number 9 is one that basically I'm working on drafting the language on this, and I've got some draft language that, having considered other things today I may have to change. But essentially what I think would happen here is that both parties want this to be, that this would be a revision of the 30-year agreement, that these would be considered as amendments. All of the things that you have agreed to or do agree to would be considered as amendments to that 30-year agreement, that they would all be in the 30-year agreement, and they would be subject to some, there's a recommendation in paragraph 6, and maybe there has to be some backup language in case the federal judge is not available for that, but that everything, including all of the decisions about the parties, everything would be in the agreement. If the governance is passed by the city and becomes a permanent component of the city, that's fine. But as to these parties, until such time as this expires, you would be bound by the governance provisions that you have agreed upon between yourselves, and that those governance provisions would become a part of the 30-year, would be an amendment to what has been recalled the 30-year agreement. And if the city chose not to enact those as part of its permanent government program, or to modify that, or come up with some other, that's fine. But as for the period of time of this agreement, those provisions agreed to between yourselves would be the governance provisions that would bind us in the future, unless you guys mutually change those.
Well, I think we just need to sort of talk about how we're going to label and present this, because there are some significant differences to the existing agreement, and in terms of how the particular terms of different provisions might work. So I think we need to work on that.
Well, one thing I think we're operating under is whatever there is before this, to the degree it is modified by this supersedes any prior provisions. To the contrary, notwithstanding, I think it's the old language we used to do.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Now with that, John, I think I have kind of covered two things I think we can get worked out, or I want you guys to give some consideration to, and that puts us back to the squeeze point of this thing, and that is you have received a proposal yesterday afternoon, which I've called the 5:30 proposal. That means it was 5:30 in the afternoon. Now, it was 5:14 at 5:30 from the city. Do you have a response to the city's most recent proposal?
I do want to make just one thing that may not have been clear from our proposal yesterday. One of the changes we made was to modify our offer on the prospective COLA cap, which previously had been 1.5, and then we moved that to 2%.
Right.
The fact that we did not address the bifurcation, in other words, the difference between employees with less than 10 years or greater than 10 years, means that that wasn't changed, simply the 1.5 to the 2 in both portions of those proposals. I just wanted to make that clear.
So your age 55 would still be there for
employees with less than
the
10.
employees with less than 10 years.
We are simply on both pieces of that proposal moving the 1.5.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, John, your responses. And I think you have a proposal.
Oh, yeah. Now you gonna need a paper man today? Yes, sir.
And the longest part of this, and the first part I want to address, will be issues involving enhanced authority.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Yes, sir.
Report in the Senate, item 2.
Yes, sir.
I think it's secret. It's see what Senate looks like. I don't understand it.
All right, I'd like,
Hold just a minute, Senator. Let me make sure we got the technology's overcoming us here sometimes. We got it going. What we have here handing out today labeled Board 515 recaps what we talked about yesterday afternoon. Item 4 talks about and clarifies the enhanced investment authority that the city proposes, and it's the language that is in the current ordinance that's pending before the city council, starting on paragraph, on page 2. This section X, a lot of section X's there. And this is the language that is currently pending, or was in 2013-669, I believe, that.
That's the enhanced, so what you're saying is your enhanced,
We're identifying and describing the enhanced benefits, yes.
the city came back yesterday with an enhanced investment authority approach as part of their overall deal, and this would be the enhanced authority that you would be seeking, is that which was stated in that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't need to ask you some questions about your proposal. Under this, the employee contributions gradually increase from 7 to 10% of pay. I'm assuming that what that is a repetition of an agreement we've already reached, which is that the employee contributions would increase, as we have previously agreed to 8% and would go to 10% immediately upon reinstatement of the pay cuts. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So that's no change. All right. The all current and future chapter monies and accounts reduce the city's contribution. The plan you presented yesterday took all of the current and future chapter monies, took all of the current monies that you have in 2 identified accounts I think we kind of agreed somewhere in the neighborhood of $61+ million. Those would immediately be transferred into the account. Those are, I think, were the chapter monies and the excess chapter monies and the stabilization monies. Additionally, you would be transferring onto this instead of the original plan, which was a 4% plan. You would be under this proposal. You would be transferring all of the amounts that you receive, except those, and I'm going to call them the Christmas bonus. I just think it's semantically better for our discussion.
Maybe holiday?
Yeah, holiday, even better. Holiday bonus. You would transfer all of the monies to the city in the future. Under your plan yesterday, you had it capped at $100 million. Do you still perceive that you would cap it at $100 million, or would this be you would continue those transfers until we reached, I believe the goal in this agreement was the 80%?
Let me think about that a little bit more. This number 2 is the follow-up of the $100 million. It gets us to the $100 million level.
Well, I'm going
to try and think of what we could do to continued supplemental funding until we reach the 80% level.
The goal has been from the outset to get to 80%. Both sides have said that. You've talked about your needs for that to occur and where that would put us in terms of the city has talked about that. What I would suggest, John, is that yesterday and the moderator would suggest that you all consider the following. Yesterday's plan, as I analyzed it last night, did the following. You went $61 million up front, and you went approximately $7 million, which is an additional roughly $2 million a year above what the rate would have been. About $7 million of chapter funds would go in there for $5 million for not 5 years, but until such time as for 5 years. What that would not do, it would not move us to 80% funding by 2028, which I think the parties had agreed was a goal, although admittedly those numbers will always be somewhat squishy. What I'm asking is this proposal one that would consider additional contribution from the chapter monies after the 5th year and until such time as 80% is reached? or some amount of that.
I'll answer that question in a few minutes, while.
Okay, that's fair.
Thanks,
Can I
John.
ask a quick question?
You can, sure.
So I'm looking at the Board 51414 proposal, and two items were immediately eliminated as we had already agreed to them, current employees and new member COLA. I just want to make sure I'm clear, John. This,
Wait a minute. I think you said that. You said had already been agreed to?
no, in other words, John included, or the board included on the 514.
Right. Number one is the same as their offer yesterday, and that is, we've already been agreed to.
Very quickly into, those were eliminated. So that left essentially number two, which is the exact same to number two. Number one in your proposal for today, we've already agreed to. Two is identical to what was on last night's proposal. Three is identical to what was on last night's proposal.
Yep.
The established share plan.
Then I've misread this. I misread number two. Number two here does not, as I read it, contain the 5-year limit. John's saying that right now he's considered 100 million, but he's willing to consider the continued, that this provision could be to continue the
That's all I'm
payment
trying-
until the 80%.
That's all I'm trying to clarify, just because
Okay.
the language is the same, so the meaning might be different, but I'm just trying to clarify
Got it.
since the language, because the language was the same. The one new thing here appears to be the enhanced investment authority, which was in our proposal last
Right.
night. So
And we
there
just
didn't-
fleshed it out.
Yeah, there didn't seem to be anything different, and that's why I'm just
That's
trying to
correct.
clarify.
That's
What Senator Smith is describing would be something
That's
different.
right. What he's described is something that he asked me to, just a minute ago, to think about, and I'm going to think quick. We got criticized for taking too long a breaks yesterday, so I'm going to think while we're sitting here.
All right. Let me go back to the city. The issues that this leaves, then, using kind of your approach yesterday, Chris, which is you had the COLA issue in front of you. You had the COLA issue in which what you had proposed to do is, I believe, to raise the cap to 2%. You had a range that you had narrowed with a base of 2.5 to a cap of 10 on drop. You wanted you wanted the funding to extend in some form until 80% was achieved from the additional funding from the city side, which we're trying to address now. You were willing to give enhanced investment authority. Admittedly, this language is language that you have not agreed to. This was language, however, that has been presented and you guys are at least familiar with, and you can work off of that. The establishing the share plan, so that we're clear on this, John, the share plan, if it were established in all likelihood, given the commitments that you would be making, that share plan would not be funded until the 80%. It would be established, but it wouldn't actually be funded until 80% fund status level had been reached. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
Okay, tell me how that would work.
Number 5 establishes the share plan basically as a shell.
That's what I meant,
Number
yeah.
2, if you just add the words after the period on the third line there, and add the words to the $100 million level, then it's clear that's the same thing we were
Yeah, I got
talking
it.
about yesterday.
I got it. What I want to
Just
know,
so we're clear about that.
we got it.
Now, we may be able to continue after that threshold is reached with a continued supplemental appropriation of a percentage of the chapter funds until the base benefit fund reaches 80%. We would certainly entertain that as a spirit of continued cooperation. And then there would be some funds that would be available to fund the share plan. But as you pointed out, it's well after 5 years from now.
Well, following up on this, to be clear, because I'm going to push you guys a little bit today, because both of you need a little pushing.
Thank you.
John, the deal here that I'm looking at says 100 million. You also had a proposal before you put that on the table by which you had a willingness to continue the 4% for a period of time. the 4%, and Joey, correct me if I use the wrong numbers here, if the 4%, if within this 5-year period, and I think that we anticipate that would be the case, if within the 5-year period, the cuts had been reinstated, then the employee contribution would go to 10% under the plan and would remain at 10%. If the board then was willing to put the additional 4% in, they would then be putting in 14% between the employee contribution and the board's contribution until they reached 80%. Are you willing to do that?
That was on the step-down approach.
I know that. I'm saying, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to put in an additional 4% above what you've put on the table now? And if so, if the 4% were put in, I'm turning to the city. It's become pretty evident here that the board is I'm going to use the term as diplomatic as I can, doesn't seem to be fond of the efforts that you've made thus far on COLA and on the issue of the drop, although we'll talk about those components separately. But if the board was willing to go forward and add the additional 4% after the threshold that was yesterday suggested, which I know both of you disagree on how much you're entitled to in your time, but is a substantial increase in the funding levels. If they were to put the additional 4% in, as they've suggested, would that get us to 2028, 80%?
Based on the work the task force did.
Right, and I'm using that as my reference point too.
If the board were to put in its additional half of chapter funds, the 4% you're referring to, which is about $5 million, the city were to put in the neighborhood of about $40 million, and we were to have a going forward normal cost benefit level similar to what's in the task force, yes, that would get you to 80% by 2028. What we don't know is what any sort of different benefit level than what the task force recommended would do to the time horizon. But setting that aside for a second, in terms of the unfunded liability payment, yes.
Okay, now let's back off and talk about that for just a moment, because that really leaves us down to the COLA. And there's a couple of ways to look at this. One of the problems with the share plan that you have out there, John, is it's a shell.
Correct.
And it would remain a shell for quite some period of time if we were to do what you were suggesting here. Because they're just really, I mean, it would, unless we were to take some other source of money and put that into the share plan would remain essentially a shell for current employees for a substantial period of time. If there was a way to fund the share plan with some additional dollars, would that, I'm just trying to figure out, and I know we've got retirees out there, but is there any way by which the impact of the 2% COLA could be offset by funding additional money to the share plan for current employees? If I've said it wrong, you give me a quizzical look. What the city's proposal right now is a 2% COLA, right?
Correct.
The current plan is a 3% COLA, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the current employees are already going to be taking a bit of a hit immediately on their contribution. And the city's recommendation would take an additional hit on their, and I was sitting here thinking that, is it possible that is there a source of funds out there that could be used to fund the share plan to offset any COLA cuts so that employees are in fact earning as much or more money in an immediate share plan as they're giving up in a COLA? Is there a possibility, and I haven't asked the city because I know they're going to gripe when I say this, if you guys want the cut in the COLA, is there a way that we can come up with that would activate the share plan sooner so the current employees would, on balance, be doing okay? Would not be, I mean, I'm not, you're the experts on this, not me. Y'all get paid good money to think about this all the time. I get gas money. So what I want to do is figure out how to get out of this thing, and it seems to me that you guys are down to real close. Now, or could we do this? And I throw this back to both of you. Would you pull the share plan recommendation if they would pull their COLA and drop plan recommendation?
Okay, we do that.
Would the city do that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So we've got a share plan on the table, and we've got a COLA and a drop plan on the table.
Yep.
All right, those three things are on the table. Let's talk about drops separately for a moment. The current plan would have a floor of 2.5% and a cap of 10% as offered by the city, correct? The current plan has a guarantee of 8.4%, which we know in some years is a savings for the employees, and in some years is the employees would do better under a higher number. If we narrowed that gap more closely, if we could narrow that gap between saying there's a guaranteed floor of 5% and a cap of 10%, how much different, and you guys are we can't be talking about very much difference, guys. You can't be talking about anything other than somebody wanting to say, I won this issue. Now, I'm just being honest. It can't be very much difference. I just want you to think about that. There was an opening yesterday when the city made a little move, and I started thinking last night, and again, I may be dead wrong. It doesn't matter to me, except both of you came here telling me you want an agreement. I'm trying to help you facilitate that. I wouldn't have come over here if you didn't both say you wanted an agreement. You both have told me that repeatedly. Now, if it went to 5 to 10%, low of 5 and a high of 10, it cannot be as significantly different than where we are right now. And neither one of you are saying you'd do it. I know that. I want you to think in those ways. Would that get us off of it? And are we talking about something that's that doggone important when we're talking about a drop plan that we know already exceeds and has for the last 5 years exceeded the performance that you're locked into? Now, I know I've heard from lots of people on the streets who told me, Rod, you wouldn't take it or you would take it, but I don't know if I would or wouldn't. But those are just some ideas I'm throwing out that I want you to consider.
Rod, one challenge for us, as we've mentioned before, is that under the current drop plan, people who drop have the ability to leave their funding in the plan after the 5-year drop period expires, keep it in there at that very long period of time. I don't know if that's an issue we should discuss as to whether people should continue to be allowed to do that or not, because that may weigh in on these negotiations, but obviously has a significant financial impact for the city. So just that's an operational aspect of the plan right now that's significant.
But that issue, would that be dramatically different whether the range was 5 to 10 or is it 8.4?
Well, it would be dramatically different in the sense that if someone can leave their money in the plan for 25 years as opposed to 5 years at a guaranteed rate of return, that's real money you're talking.
But your proposal hasn't been to eliminate that thus far.
It has not been thus far, no.
That's what I'm saying. So I mean, you can always play a card. You can always play a card, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to focus down on where the difference is.
You asked for issues that we should all think about.
Think about it. That's one thing.
Resolution
I understand.
of the drop issue. That's the issue that we put out there. The other thing to keep in mind on drop, of course, is that, look, there are competing plans that don't have a drop for police and fire employees. Orlando's a good example. They don't have a drop. The FRS drop percentage was 6.5% prior to, if you entered drop prior to July 1/11, it's kind of close to 1.5% after that period of time. So there are some marketplace issues that we have to be, we're willing to think outside the box and be innovative, but there are some marketplace issues and some operational issues we need to think about, like the ones I've mentioned.
Well, we're capping it under this provision. I'm accepting your cap. I'm just suggesting that there be a raised floor. And that may not be something that you think would work, but I don't know if that would move us or not. I don't know if that would get, as I say, I thought maybe the share plan, if there was a way to fund the share plan immediately or put some monies into the share plan immediately for current employees, maybe that could be seen as an offset because I know that share plans are attractive and are used in an awful lot of places. And I know, John, that's why you suggested a shared plan, is that it's a pretty popular thing with employees, correct?
Correct. And another issue is since the inception of the drop plan in 1999, police officers and firefighters have worked collectively over 7,000 years of service to the city, and the city has not paid a single dime in contribution. The members, on the other hand, continue to pay 2%.
I understand.
So, you know, an FRS drop plan, when the member goes in, they quit paying. Our people have paid, and since the inception of the drop plan, we paid active members, while they were in the plan, have paid nearly $8 million. So, you know, hollering about 8.4 looks good, but when you say you're paying 2, it's really 6.4 for while you're in there working.
Well, for 5 years, and the problem is the phase 2 for the next 40 years, while it's at 8.4 without any contributions, and it's a collateral matter. So matching it to what the city does makes it revenue neutral and doesn't have the present employees subsidizing above market rates for former employees. And that's what I think the adjustment we're trying to make.
Is there, obviously you've not addressed the COLA proposal at 2%. I'm assuming that you're rejecting the offer to
Yes, sir.
reduce the COLA.
Yes, sir.
Does it make any difference on their COLA proposal if the other language was reduced? And by the other language, it's not stated in the last couple of agreements back and forth, but that is the difference between the age 55. Does that make any difference? The tenure of just treating everybody the same, is that of any consequence? So that everybody, their proposal says that if you are a current employee and you have 10, the original proposal, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have 10 or greater number of years in at the time of it, then you can, when you retire, you get the immediate impact of the COLA.
It's 3, in that case, it's 3 years after.
It's the 3 Jan, I understand, but there's no, the clock starts running then.
There's not an age floor of
You
55.
have for those underage, for under 10 years in service, you have an age of 55 before that proposal kicks in. All I was asking is, would it make any difference in your deliberations if it was, if this applied 2% but applied to everybody and there was no age delay?
Well, wasn't the last proposal uniform for everybody? You took the under and lower?
It was not, that's what I clarified this morning, that it just affected the number, it didn't affect the sort of the bifurcation.
You hadn't changed, that's what I was getting at.
Correct,
Yeah, I understand that. It just, we were talking about, we focused on the number, and I'm just asking you to focus on the other language for a moment. If they were to take the other language, if the city was willing to say, okay, we'll drop the differentiation, we'll treat all current employees the same, and we have them at 2%, we'll treat them all, there won't be any delay, would that make any difference in or you would still be opposed to the decrease of the COLA, cost of living?
In all probability, we would probably still oppose any change from the current, because over and over, officials of the government, as well as in our office, as well as in the mediated settlement, last year we talked about preserving current employees. And so to continue that theme of preserving the current benefits for current employees is why we came up with the $100 million, just as a sign of good faith and that we're willing to help do that.
And now you're willing to put in the additional 4%.
And I'm still thinking about that 4% you asked me about. I think good sometime, but I don't think as fast as I should. But I'm mulling that right this minute.
All right.
You're keeping the
All right.
current 4% that we now pay that would have gone away under yesterday's proposal. If we left that 4% in there until they reached 80% funding, that's would be another good faith effort on our part, and we would certainly consider that.
And that would presumably by 5 years from now, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, presumably 5 years from now, employees would be at the 10% rate, and consequently that would be that that the employee contribution augmented by the board would be at a 14% rate until we got to 80%, right?
Well, rather than get it confused with employee contribution, be just a direct appropriation into the fund, equivalent 4%. But you could say it, put the hat on and say, yeah, they're paying equivalent 14%.
The combination of chapter funds and
Right, I mean, well,
employee.
we don't necessarily accept that model or structure. I mean, I think we all.
You know what,
we give
I'm just
good
talking about the number now,
meaning.
guys. I'm
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
you ain't gotta love the words.
We don't have to do that as an employee contribution, but we get the amount of money we're
Keep the
talking about.
4%
All
going
right,
until
I got it.
they reach the 80%.
And that was
funding
what,
threshold.
that was the suggested number that the task force had talked about at 14% funding. Now, admittedly, you were right, that the task force talked about reducing some of these other, because each time you don't make a change, then that has an overall cost. But the task force did not anticipate sweeping all of the money in, on the front end. If all of the money is swept on the front end, and if they've then paid all of the chapter funds except for the holiday reserve funds to the city, and they've paid, and they've committed to pay 4% till you reach 80% funding, that's a lot of shared sacrifice, because they've also agreed that they'll take an immediate 1% increase in their employees, 2% more for the employees upon reinstatement of the cuts. They've agreed to there was one other provision, I can't remember and I'd have to pull my notes, but there was one other provision that you had recommended that they have accepted as it related to current employees, which they previously had not accepted. That's what it was. It was the 48-month. I'm sorry, I drew a blank. I knew what it was. It was the 48-month provision. Now, that proposal, if that proposal were acceptable to the city, then that leaves us as whether or not the COLA and the drop cost, which we know, given your proposed differences, have got to be minimal on the drop cost, then can we get an agreement? And I want you guys to think about it, because that's really where you are. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Y'all are following this more closely every day, but I work on it every night. We're down to this. The shared sacrifice is what we talked about. And the task force talked about 14% funding needing to get you to the 80% by 2028. The board, in conjunction with the other changes we've made, including the immediate 1% increase in employee contribution going to 10% that should get you to that number. If all things that you had asked for had occurred, it might even get you to that number sooner, because it didn't contemplate that cash injection on the front end of an additional, and I'm going to use your number, of an additional $29 million. I won't say use the number, because I'm not going to argue about whose stabilization dollars those are. I'm asking you, is drop and a 1% difference in the COLA from what you offered, is drop and a 1% COLA difference, does that offset now what would be, at least get you to your 80% funding as rapidly as projected? Now, I'm not an actuary, but I will say I've made some phone calls. I don't think that these are big cost items that you're talking about, and I think those cost items, we're now talking about, you're getting all of the chapter funds for 5 years, an additional 4% till you reach 80%, and you're sweeping the funds on the front end, and you're getting the immediate increase in employee contribution. Is that enough shared sacrifice for the city?
Well, the answer is, let me explain why drop and COLA matter. Drop was originally described as a program that would be revenue neutral for the city. It has not been revenue neutral for the city, largely because of the guaranteed rate of return over time. COLA is probably the #1 cost driver of the city's normal cost going forward into the future. So one of the goals of this effort has been to establish a normal cost that is financially sustainable for the city. When you have a guaranteed COLA of whatever amount, in this case 3%, that means that every year that inflation does not keep up with that 3% level, the city loses money. That becomes a substantial expense for the city. There have been, I think it's 3 years, I might be wrong, 2 or 3 years in the last 5 that there has been no Social Security COLA because inflation has not kept up with that number in this economy. That is a major cost driver for the city. That is why those two subjects are very important for us, because they have significant financial implications going forward. In order to make sure that we have a sustainable benefit package that the city can afford year in, year out, we've got to make sure that something like COLA is revenue neutral, and we need to make sure that we aren't sort of financially victimized when inflation does not and the COLA are not kind of at the same place. Those are the two concerns, just to help you better understand.
I actually go back I remember back when the COLA was never enough but it doesn't matter. Where we really are now is the city's at 2% on COLA. The current status is 3% on COLA. And I'm asking the city to consider, and where we are from your proposal, where we are on drop is not that you're trying to do away with drop at 8.4%. What you're saying on drop is we want actual market performance with a cap of 10 and a bottom floor of 2.5. I've thrown out there as a suggestion of 5, so the range gets even more narrow, which cannot be of a significant financial impact. So we're really talking about COLA here. We're really talking about COLA of financial impact, and we're 1% apart. Now, they've offered a shared plan, maybe the enhanced authority. I don't know what will make this go, but that's where you guys are. We've got the WD-40 here. I'm trying to spray it on where we're locked, and that's where we're locked. Now,
maybe the thing to do would be, we've gotten a proposal. You've given us some items to think about.
Yep.
I think what might be appropriate is to break for a few minutes.
We'll
have the city talk, see if we can come back with something that would help move the ball forward.
And would you address, when you come back, your concerns over
Sure, and
the enhanced authority?
John, I think you started to do this, and we just got into discussing. I think you were just going to, maybe right before we break, you were going to provide a little additional information about what's in this, and then we got into something else. Do you just want to sort of summarize the investment authority changes again? I know they're in a bill. But
Yes, sir. The proposal on the top of page 2, Carol, page 2. Just going to wait so everybody can catch up with.
Sure.
That's just introductory language on page 1, page 2. Section X, because whatever section is going to wind up in the ordinance. Says the board's authorized to invest and reinvest the assets of the fund and it lists a whole lot of statutory provisions that authorize investments by police and fire pension funds as well as other public pension funds, and alternative investments as defined as, and all of those next words there, going all the way down to the E. I'm not at the optometrist. All the way down to the end of E are straight out of the Florida statute, which is permissible for the, permissible for the Florida retirement system. There's no hedge funds in here. Our friends from Q talked about we're too small and not important enough to be involved in hedge funds. No hedge funds in here. One of the city's general employees, great moneymaker recently, has been international bonds. And we haven't been able to invest in them, but with these alternative investment vehicles and this other statutory changes, we can get there. And that's what it is. And like I say, the same language is in 2013, I believe it's 669 is the bill filed by Councilmember Schellenberg last fall.
So this is identical to what's in that bill?
Taken from there.
And consistent largely with the investment authority that the FRS has?
Yes, straight out of the statute.
All right, I'm going to request a 20-minute break for the teams to go consider some of the stuff. I hope nobody, I hope I'm With both of you, I'm available to talk to either one of you about ideas to move this thing. I'm going to push both of you until you think it doesn't do any good. But I am telling you, my goal here is for you to realize how close you are, because you are very close. You are very close. These are important issues, and important issues, I understand, for both sides. And I want both of you to be thinking about ways that we can handle these. And I'm looking at John at your side, because I think I've been yelling at their side here a little more in the last minute, so I'm going to kind of focus back on you. This is a very narrow difference. Can we make this thing go? Is it worth it to both of you to get this thing to go? If it's not, that's fine, but we're not that far apart. So please be thinking of ways, creative ways, to make this thing happen. 20-minute Matterport Porter time is?
2:37.
We will convene back here then at 3 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay, with everybody back, what I'd like to do is, I'm going to turn it, Chris, to you for a moment and see if you could, you have some responses or even maybe some questions and whatever.
Well, I think
Let's see if we can move this thing forward.
One matter we wanted to try and put to rest was number 8, which is the outstanding governance matter.
Yes.
And we have some language on that which is very similar to the MSA, and let me distribute that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor.
So essentially what we have done is removed everything that's in black ink here is language that's already been agreed to. The rest is simply the language of the mediated settlement agreement with one slight addition. We now insert a final sentence that says participants in the current senior staff pension plan will receive the plan benefits which the parties have determined are comparable to those as if they had been enrolled in the FRS special risk plan unless the JPF-PF board sets a lesser benefit level. All that does is, again, take the MSA language, and John, you'd mentioned sort of the board's discretion here. We just didn't want to preempt the board if they wanted to do something different, and so different and of a smaller amount. And so that's what we would propose to resolve number 8.
Agreed.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay. Further by the, anything further?
So just all that means is we have now, let me just sort of reiterate, we have now agreed on the governance piece, and with the typical caveat that everything is, but one second.
4 and 9.
Well, that just means
Right.
4 and 9, correct, are the only ones, and we're able to reach overall agreement. That would obviously impact 4, so otherwise we're agreed on the governance provisions. And I think Mr. Gravy had some questions on the investment authority, if you're ready to move on.
Yes, I know that you guys just had a chance to see this plan for the first time today, and I know you had some questions, so I'm going to address ourselves now to the Enhanced Investment Authority proposal that was made by the board, and I think is based on an ordinance proposal that was before the council at some point in time. Joey, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Rod. John, in reading this, I pulled up 2013 669 as you suggested, I've reviewed that in the past as well. It doesn't look exact, but that's fine. As to the current proposal, the only questions that I have are, you've laid out 112,661, 175, 185, and 215,47. Understanding that that would largely put the fund in line with the Florida retirement system. Just couple of quick comments. I would suggest, or I would like to see a letter F, if possible, that would say, I know you confirmed this earlier as being your intent, but I just want it to be expressed on paper, that investments in hedge funds shall be expressly prohibited. I think we're all on the same page there. And then, in addition, as far as alternatives go, private equity would basically be what's left on the table. I know you added some definitions below. The Florida retirement system in 21547 is allowed to invest up to 20% by my read. And again, this was just in the last 15 minutes that I read that. From my time working with private clients, what was good for a client that had $5 million wasn't always good for a client with $50,000 in their account. I would just be a little worried about 20% client assets in alternatives. And I know that having the permissibility and using the permissibility are two separate things. And in here you talk about how you would file under investment policies with City Council for a 10-day review. I would like to see a cap initially on those alternative investments.
Do the caps under 21547 not apply now?
If you're just taking 21547,
Right.
there would be a cap, but
Right.
20%. 20% of client assets in alternatives is a lot. That's a lot of money. And there's a lot of liquidity concerns that you have with alternative investments. Sometimes you have lockup periods where you can't touch your money for 5, 7, 10 years. And understanding we have a financial investment advisory committee, the investment policy would be reviewed by City Council prior to any changes taking place. We have some controls there, but 20% is a lot.
So I know that I'm not strong in this area, so I want to ask my questions if I could. This one outlines the limits, it gives certain definitions that arise under the proviso that any lawful investment is provided in the applicable provisions of 112, 175, 185, and 215, and alternatives defined. So what is the difference between what you want to see here and what 215 currently permits? That's what I'm not catching, Joey. And this is me, not you.
Right.
John, you may know this right off the top of your head, but I don't know this.
I think I would like to see a cap less than 20% to alternatives.
And 215 provides for 20%, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, I got that now. I would be in particularly dense, I guess. I'll turn over to you to react to that, John.
Even though the statute provides for 20%, FRS doesn't do 20%. And as Joey pointed out with the private clients, when you have less money, you're going to put even a lesser amount in there. If you're going to replicate the FRS guidelines, you replicate the FRS guideline. You got a board of trustees who are fiduciaries to the fund. We created a financial investment advisory committee that's going to look it over. There's no way that we're anywhere near the max on some of our other investments, with the exception of fixed income, which we'd like to get out of to a greater extent. But
How about, so am I getting it right that your response is, we've put together additional protections to guard against excessive investment because we've done that through the use of the new, well, we will be doing that through the use of the new financial advisory board, as well as the board, which is limited by law to its fiduciary responsibilities. Is that right?
correct. And as Joey points out, we also have our friends from Summit Strategy who make recommendations on the overall portfolio, not only the alternative investment, but the overall, to keep them in balance.
Okay, and you had said that you didn't, I think Joey just is saying, I'd like to codify as one of the things in here for future, that the statement that investments in hedge funds would be expressly prohibited from this enhanced authority.
Well, I think you know more about this than I do, but Isn't the law pretty clear? What is not permitted is prohibited?
Well,
Would you
yeah,
go to page 2?
you know, go to page 2.
No, I'm Carol. She's bringing up the other page so that folks can read along with us.
All right. This is,
One
am I on the wrong page? Sorry.
There you go.
Under section Roman numeral 10.
Right.
Got it.
But in the effort to reach agreement and in the spirit of harmony and cooperation, we'd like to amend this proposal to add a parenthesis, little f, close parenthesis, period. Investments in hedge funds are prohibited, period.
Back to you, Joey. Does that satisfy you? That's what you wrote and done there?
Yes. Nobody in the world usually get along with them.
There we go. All right. I know that this is not acceptance, but the response that I've gotten back is they will accept your proposed language regarding investments in hedge funds being expressly prohibited in the plan, but their response on the other is that essentially, rather than set a lower number, they believe that there's sufficient protections built in by, that's one of the very reasons that we created the financial oversight that you all have already created and agreed to and is in the process of being implemented. So, but we're open to, if you have a specific number that you think should be the reduced number, or do you trust that the kind of complex that we've put together works or will work?
Why don't we ponder that as we consider
I got it,
other
I got it.
issues?
I'm
because
just,
obviously
but that's the only thing there, I got it.
We offered the investment authority in exchange for some other
I
priorities
got
for the
that,
city.
I got
So,
it,
yeah.
I got that. And I'm not understanding, that's not put to bed. I'm just saying that if we pass that, we now have your language that you've suggested, if you accept that.
Okay, one more other, go ahead, Joey.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Mr. Moderator, the only other, it's more of a question to John.
Okay.
170, you talked about earlier how 175, 185 restricts you in the area of the higher yielding bond type investments. And I agree with you that that's been one of the better areas of performance in the market for the last 3 to 5 years. Are you comfortable, so are you saying this language that you proposed allows you to invest in those? As I was reading this while we were away, I just didn't see specifically where it talks about the permissibility.
I believe elsewhere in 21547, it has the other bond rating. We talk about B bonds.
Okay, that answered you?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further from the city at this point?
No.
Okay. Anything, John, that you have that you wish to propose at this point? In response to anything they've given, I have some thoughts I'd like to put out here. If you, and I think we've actually taken care of one of them right now. I'd like you guys to ponder well, first of all, before I go to that, I want to make sure that we don't have a non-meeting of the mind that is genuinely misunderstanding. The proposal that I suggested today, and I know you haven't agreed to, was the following: that you would take the proposal that you made of the first 61 plus million, you would make that transfer. You would pay those amounts for the first 5 years, which constituted the entire 175, 185 monies, less the holiday bonus. Is that correct?
Correct. Till we
Then
reach the
what
100 million
Till
threshold.
capped at 100 million. What I said today is that at that point in time, you would then go to the addition, you would maintain the 4% that you would have otherwise discontinued. You would maintain that 4% from chapter funds, added to employee benefits at 10%, maintain that 14% funding until we got to 80%. What then happened as I began because I began to phase in my understanding, and I want to make sure that nobody on this side misunderstands or your side misunderstands the way I'm reading it. That 4% would be the 4% that you would have otherwise withdrawn because you do not believe it would have constituted enhanced benefits. Because there would not be an additional 4% above that 4% if you were in fact holding back the city's holiday, the monies wouldn't be there to do. And what happened is, as I was listening to you guys, I was sitting here, wait a minute, I know you wouldn't be offering money you don't have, and that's what made sense to me then, is what you're saying is you would have gone to a zero-level funding after the 5th year because you would have believed the enhanced benefit number because the new employees don't get them. But what you're now saying is I would retain the 4% funding continuously until the 14% funding, or the 4% to the 14% would be maintained as long as it took to reach 80% of funding. Have I got that right?
In addition to the 100 million, we would continue to maintain a 4% contribution until the 80% funding level was achieved by the fund.
I got it.
Yes.
All right. So
just-
question that, so everybody
Just to
follows up, because
clarify.
I don't want to, I think there was some misunderstanding,
Right.
because I knew the math wouldn't work, is what happened.
So, John, right now, there's 4%, or effectively half of the chapter funds going into the base benefits plan. What you're saying is you would agree to continue that additional 4% beyond that until the plan reaches 80% funding.
No, I'm saying that 4% we would maintain until we reached
So
80%.
the 4% you're already putting into base benefits,
Right.
so there's nothing additional you're offering in that.
In our first proposal yesterday,
Right.
we talked about 4%, 3, 2, 1, and
Steps.
then the
But the way
reduction.
you presented that was additional money over and above the 4% you were currently.
Exactly, and if you continue down the chart, you would see that in 2017 or 18, 2% of the current 4% would be reduced, and then the final year, the second 4%.
So the city would have, under the proposal, the city would actually have less than it receives now under the current, under the proposal, is what you're suggesting.
No,
Or the
Nope.
plan would receive less than it does now.
no. Our proposal, as we just amended it, in addition to the 100 million that we already kind of, everybody understands that part, we would maintain the current 4% commitment until the fund reaches 80%.
And let me tell you why I thought this misunderstanding came about, because I did the math, and the math wouldn't work. Because I had already put in my proposal that that was to be, you were also retaining that portion of what we've been calling the holiday fund, or holiday bonus, or whatever you want to use. So I knew the math wouldn't work, and I think it was actually council was saying, wait a minute, the math doesn't work. And then I realized what you had been suggesting before is that you would have cut off your 4% at the end of the 5-year period.
Correct.
And you would have, the board would not have funded, the employee contribution would be at 10, but you would not have
10%.
funded.
Correct.
What you're now saying is, because we believe that that funding was based on enhanced benefits, and we believe the enhanced benefits had been reduced. What you're now saying is that you would maintain the 14% funding between the two until such time as 80% is reached.
That's correct.
What you are saying was that, wait a minute, I was thinking we had the 4%, and this was an additional 4% above the 4%, which would have gone to 18%. And the math won't work, I mean, it just wouldn't work. And I think I'm the source of some of that misunderstanding. So I want to make sure that everybody now understand the proposal. Nobody's accepted it.
Sure, no, it just-
That's the proposal.
It just doesn't mean any additional money going into the unfunded liability. I mean, disrespect to this, what John's offer is saying, I'm going to give you what you already have for an additional period of time. So that's just my source of confusion here.
Well-
Is that there's nothing additional that would go
In
down
fairness,
unfunded liability.
fairness-
I'm just trying to make sure. I
In
interpret it
fairness,
correctly.
what is being proposed here is that, wait a second, the chapter funds that we were going to continue after a point in time, which I think first was a rollback, and then the next proposal was a cap number of 100 million. There's no cap number. We'll continue that funding after we have once all that money has already been given, we'll continue our current funding rate, which I didn't understand your question. They're currently funding, well, they currently are funding at 4%.
Right, currently,
Right.
about 4% goes to the base benefits.
right.
Of the plan, 4% goes to enhanced benefits.
Right, that's correct.
Right.
And
So
what
this-
and what he's saying is, what he's saying is, as I understand it, and I know the math on this wouldn't work, you were using a number of either 9 million, well, let's say you rolled back 2 million that you call the holiday number. If you roll back the holiday number, I knew that there was a misunderstanding because the math doesn't work. There's not enough money there. All the money would be gone. So you can't, I mean, there's not a third half of this thing. So I just want to make sure. Now, you can disagree with it and
Sure,
I just didn't want any misunderstanding because you were actually, your side was the one that made me think, wait a minute, that's absolutely right. That can't be, and then I remembered your proposal had no additional money after the 5th year. So what would happen is you would put all the money that you were committed on the front end, all the chapter money, except for that which was the holiday reserve, and then you would maintain current funding until 80% is met. Even though your position might be of the board, or that you might have argued to the contrary, that we no longer have an obligation because we believe that there are no more further benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not going to remake arguments y'all have heard many times. I just want to make sure everybody's at the same point in understanding what the proposal was, because it couldn't have been as I was thinking of at one point in time, because the number wouldn't work.
Right, so it would be to maintain the current 4% going to the plan until such time as 80% funded, which right now under the existing agreement is going to the plan until 2030.
Well, except that for the first 5 years after the agreement, all of the chapter money, except
The thing.
What the chief said, under the current agreement, that 4% would go until 2030. And he is absolutely correct on that.
Yes.
But our proposal was to change that.
Yes, and to the first 5 years, all of the chapter money, except that money reserve, would go to you, to the plan, let's say.
Is that accurate? Because John, I'm not.
And I'll make sure I'm right on this. During the first 5 years of your proposal, you're going to put up the upfront money of 61 million, then 5 years, you would give all of the money except the reserve money, and after the 5th year of all of the reserve money except the money you reserve for holiday, then you would continue what is the status quo until 80% is reached. Is that accurate?
It's close to accurate. I'd rather use the term 100 million rather than 5th year, because if there's a drop in money, it may take 6 years. So, you know.
Okay, till you reach 100, till you reach 100 million.
Minus the holiday requirements would go in to the fund.
Until it reaches 100 million.
Until we reach the 100 million
Okay,
threshold.
that may be more accurate,
So
yes.
is the difference, just so I understand the difference, is the difference between the 100 million and the 80% funding? Because he'd put in all of the money until 100 million, and we're asking for all of the money until 80% funding. I think,
Right.
is that, so that's,
Right, and what
that's
he's
the
saying.
difference. And this is, again, another one of those issues, which for the other municipalities is done between the city and the employees, and which does have flex in it. And it's because the existing money you're looking at and paying the enhanced benefits. So the city has an actuarial obligation to pay the enhanced benefits it's paid for. These funds would normally go to the city, and the city would be having this argument over whether they're properly used when they're paying for past funds. Hence the awkward position Mr. Keene's in having to negotiate against the corpus itself. And so I just wanted to highlight 80%, I think, is a mutual benefit. I mean, everybody wants that 80%, and the 100 million is, you know, we presently have a $700 million unfunded liability. 1.7.
billion.
And so the 100 million, I think, really does, it's a lot of money, but those enhanced benefits, we're still paying for those, and we just don't have the money to make up the other $1.6 billion, dollars.
Well, my role is not to tell you what to
Trying to
accept or not
clarify.
accept.
Yeah,
I
just
just wanted to make
clarify.
sure that people didn't leave the table in
Well,
good
it's good to
faith.
clarify, it's good to clarify.
I didn't want to make people, because I knew the math doesn't work. It
Right.
can't, there wouldn't be 4% left
Correct.
and I knew that math wouldn't work, and then that's what made me do that. So I have something I want to throw out here to see if we can get the conversation moving on these last few issues, because we are really down to a last few, albeit important. I would like the parties to consider the following, that The agreed-upon funding set forth in the board's second proposal of 514, and just to be clear, so you don't have to go back and look at your notes, that was the proposal of yesterday afternoon when the 100 million. That the annual payments of all Chapter 175 and 185 funds except the retiree bonus, that all of those monies would be paid until such time as the $100 million was reached. That the board would continue after that $100 million threshold to pay into the retirement fund at the rate of 4% of its 4% of the chapter funds, which I think is 1/2, if I recall right, until the fund reaches the 80% funding level. The drop plan for all current employees would be determined by use of the CPI employed by the Social Security Administration for actual performance, provided that the rate would not fall below 5% and could not exceed 10%. The board would be given the agreed-upon enhanced investment authority as set forth in its plan as amended today by the hedge fund language. That paragraph 8 of the plan now I'm going to withdraw that language because paragraph 8 has now been agreed upon. So we're fine. I had a paragraph 8 proposal. So let me mark through that. All of the obligations of the plan, including the obligations addressing governance, will remain in effect between the parties for the entire term of the agreement. That the only provision the only provisions that would extinguish earlier than the expiration of the agreement would be the funding provisions if they were reached first. In other words, if you reach the 80% threshold, then the additional 40 million and the additional 4% upon reaching the threshold would no longer bind the party if you got there before the expiration of the current 30-year agreement. That the COLA would remain as set forth under current practices, and that paragraph 9 language would be agreed upon between the Office of the General Counsel and the Special Counsel for the Board as assisted by me. And the reason for that on paragraph 9 is there is some specific language there about the use of the magistrate, the use of a master, the use of a current judge that I think that you guys have a generalized agreement upon, but I'm not prepared to do that, although we could do 9 and bring it back after you guys have agreed to it for one last look at it by everybody. But that's my thought on paragraph 9, that being the one, if you will, is kind of the wraparound of how it's to be refereed in the future. Now, I throw that out knowing that neither of you have agreed to those provisions, and both of you will disagree to some of those provisions. You may come back with a better plan, but essentially I want to repeat the heart of this. The heart of it is that
Could you run through those?
I'm going to go through it again.
Crystal clear, one more.
Yep. The board's second proposal of 514, as modified, would be accepted. The modification would be that after the 5 years, and I strike that, after the $100 million threshold has been reached, the board will continue to fund the plan by paying the 4%, so parenthetically, which when added to the employee contribution at that rate should be 14%. The drop plan for all current employees would use the CPI of the Social Security Administration for actual performance, provided that the rate would not fall below 5% and provided that it was capped at 10%. All obligations of this plan, including the governance provisions, would remain in effect between the parties for the term of this agreement. That's whether or not they became part of city ordinance or not, whether or not they, except for those provisions which are based upon reaching the 80% threshold, meaning your respective funding obligations, were they reached earlier, would no longer bind the parties. And the COLA would remain unchanged for current employees. paragraph 9 would be agreed upon by the Office of the General Counsel and the Special Counsel for the Board, who is Mr. Klossner, as refereed by me. That's moderator's proposal of about 3:30 in the afternoon on Thursday. I know it will be accepted by both of you almost immediately, or not. But it is my effort to get you to focus now on where we really are, because that's really everything else is off. That's where we are. Now, y'all may say, nope, I can't do it, and you may say, nope, I can't do it. Well, if you can't do it, there's a difference between can't and won't. Maybe you won't do it. Maybe you won't do it. Maybe you can't do it. Maybe you can't do it. Come up with something else, but that's where we are. It's down to this. If you guys want this agreement that both of you have told me you wanted for a long period of time, this would wrap it up, realizing there would be work we would have to have a final get-together for everybody to review all proposed language. I understand that. But this is a proposal that would wrap it up. The COLA would be preserved. There is not a shared plan in this. There is a change in the drop plan. If you want to know where I came up with 5 years, I will refer you to, if you would look at the task force recommendations, there is a Pew provision in the task force recommendation that says with 75% predictive accuracy, the earning would be 5.47 or something like that, 5.5%. It doesn't matter. You may have other numbers. That's where I didn't just pull one out of a hat, so that you understand that. That meant that there is predictive in the task force performance data such that Pew found that to be a greater number than that was likely with a 75% accuracy. I think a number not far below that was found to be accurate with something in excess of, I mean, I know all people predict on the other hand, but it was pretty preclusive. So that's where we are, folks. That's a proposal. I would like both parties to take a few minutes to look at that. I will be available if I didn't make anything clear. It is a proposal that you're not going to like on COLA. You're not going to like on drop. You're not going to like entirely on funding. You're not going to like on funding because it's more than you put on the table until I pushed it. You're saying that, wait a minute, it's no more money than we're receiving now. You're saying, wait a minute, I'm continuing after I give $100 million to fund at a new level till that I didn't think I had to do. So y'all can come up with a better idea, come up with it.
Now, before we go off to think of those ideas.
Yes, sir.
The task force was very clear that they wanted an enforcement mechanism to require the city council to
That was
budget.
already agreed to on paragraph 6 of number 9. That's already been agreed to. Paragraph 6 has a provision. I'm just suggesting, the only problem with paragraph 6 is that it took a federal judge and appointed the federal judge. I think there needs to be an alternative there in case the federal judge either can't or won't accept that assignment. So I've suggested to both your council and...
Is that, John, is that what you're referring to, the federal judge provision, or do you mean the investment of additional money?
The compelling, last year in pension reform in New Jersey, the employees were assessed additional contribution, and the state was going to raise their contribution this year. Well, the legislature decided not to do it. Same thing happened in Pennsylvania. And Mr. Cannon, distinguished member of the task force, he said in this room, said many times, as y'all heard him say, we need a mechanism in the going forward to hold the feet to the fire so that it will be funded. That it's not.
Are you talking about if the 40 million wasn't forthcoming?
Right, in the city's original proposal, they talked about 40 million subject to
Appropriation. I thought we already understood that if the city did not reach its funded level, that's already in there, but I'll double check for it. If the city does not meet their funded level, I thought you were talking about, you also have a method for regularly seeing that it happens.
Right.
But if it does not happen, and the city was to not fund at its $40 million level, then your obligation within that year whatever that obligation will be is not,
No.
is canceled. Is that not right?
That is not right. What we talked about, the enforcement mechanism we talked about is, to the extent, and our proposal was, the city would put in $40 million, the fund would
Got it.
put in additional. To the extent the city does not meet its target, the fund would be able to reduce its contribution proportional to whatever the city's
Okay.
reduction would be. So it,
So
that was the
if you gave
enforcement.
nothing,
Right.
if they didn't appropriate $40 million, what you're saying is they appropriated $30 million that year, your obligation is reduced commensurately. Is that correct?
Correct.
If they didn't give any money that year,
Right.
the board has no obligation in the same
additional
year to
money
meet
the
its
board
additional
would
money.
be putting in would not be required under that. So it ties the two.
Is that what you were talking about?
Right.
Okay. I don't think there's a disagreement on how to do that, and
We talked about it.
I thought we had agreed with
agreed to
that. I thought you were talking about, on paragraph 9, there's also a provision for, I think it's quarterly and annual oversight. All I suggested, and I know your attorney as well as their attorney has some question about, well, what if the federal judge, you guys put in there a federal judge, and highly respected, but what if A, he's not there, B, he can't do it, whatever the case may be, some alternatives. There's also some language in there that flat doesn't apply any longer because you guys have really already answered. My suggestion on paragraph 9 was to allow the respective councils to draft that wraparound language with my referee, and we would provide that to both sides. There is no substantive change in paragraph 9. I just know that it was important to you guys. It was important to you guys that there be something that says, we're checking regularly that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, both sides.
No, I agree with that.
All right, that's not an issue, but that was my
John?
provision as
That's
paragraph 9.
resolved in paragraph 9.
Yeah.
You agree
Okay?
with that?
And paragraph 9, you already agreed.
I
to
agree with
paragraph-
these representations that are
Sure,
made here.
sure, okay.
That language has to do that, and I'll be the referee to see that that language does it. But the attorneys, they both are generally in accordance on the concept of having oversight and how it should work, but having a kind of a fallback position if A won't work, then what's B, okay?
All right.
All right, you guys take a few minutes to consider the mediator's proposal, and let's see if we can, and I would tell you, I mean, I know it's easy to nitpick and say, I'll take one and not take two, and I know both of you are going to say that to me, but I want you to understand, we don't get an agreement until we have an entire agreement. So if you have to swallow something you don't like on either side, your answer is now to put it against the weight of no agreement versus an agreement that doesn't have everything I like, but has some things I do like and some things I don't, which I have found in my life to be most agreements I've ever entered into. In case my wife is listening, it's not that. All right, take a few minutes.
Senator Smith, could I just check, to John's point that he just raised, all of the matters that were previously agreed on, nothing was intended to be changed by this language?
No,
Okay. This
no,
is just
no.
the outstanding issues?
This is,
Okay.
I'm not changing anything.
That's what
you
I
guys-
thought, I just wanted-
I actually scratched 8 off of my proposal, because when you guys walked in, I thought
Yeah,
8.
we saw, yeah.
You got that out, so
Yes.
go talk about it. Come back to me in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm definitely never doing Secret Santa with you. Yeah.
Well, I want to take,
Find my own clothes
I want
wrapped
to,
up in
I want to,
boxes for me. Yeah.
I want to take fault over the 4%, because I knew the math wasn't right, and I knew I made a mistake. I made that mistake. For just a moment. Issues, for just a moment. I think I have made a proposal that both of you have in front of you, and I know that both of you are equally enamored with it, but I'll let the city go first, and then John go, and both of you can tell me the things that you believe that I have gotten wrong here, or that we need to perhaps approach it a different way, or that you have a more creative approach to. Chris, why don't you respond to the moderator's proposal of this afternoon?
You bet. So we would propose the following in an effort to try and resolve the outstanding issues. We would propose, obviously, some issues we're already taking care of, governance, Section 10 as it relates to the negotiation of benefits, how those will be handled in the future. We would propose an agreement that is effective October 1st, 2014 through September 30th, 2024, so for a 10-year period. During those 10 years, the city will commit to putting at least an additional $40 million each year over and above ARC to help pay down the unfunded liability. During that time, that 10-year period, the fund would pay an additional 4%. This is above and beyond the amount it already pays toward base benefits, so approximately $5 million a year toward paying down the unfunded liability. This would also include the transfer of the $61 million in the enhanced benefit account and the CBSA to the city for the benefit of the plan. For drop, we would have drop pegged to the actual rate of return with a floor of 3.9% and a cap of 10%. For COLA, it would be a cap of 2%, with the COLA being the either 2%, either lesser of 2% or the Social Security COLA. That would apply to all current employees, so there would no longer be any bifurcation. That would apply to all current employees. We would agree with the language on the investment authority with the one change that was made earlier, explicitly
Hedge funds.
As to hedge funds. And again, we've already agreed to the governance language, including Section 10. As I said, the term of the agreement would be through September 30th, 2024. We'd obviously have to work out Section 9 as to the enforcement of the agreement and the disposition of the pending lawsuit and some of those other matters.
Would you agree with the method that I had proposed on that, which is to have their special counsel and your general counsel work it out with my refereeing and help them towards getting that, what I think reflects the other
agreements? We feel good
agreements?
about the concept, we just need to work
I
out
got
the
it.
language.
Okay.
So I believe that's covered all outstanding issues, and that would be the city's proposal.
John, your reaction to the moderator's proposal, and then any reaction you have to the city's proposal.
I just need to get a clarification, Chief, that
Sure.
you would tell me that our proposal for the $100 million would continue, correct?
Correct.
And then tell me about the continued
Sure.
requirement of money.
So as I understood in addition to that proposal, as I understood your proposal, as part of that, the additional 4%, again, beyond base benefits, would be paid for 5 years. That's as I understood your proposal. This would extend it for an additional 5 years so that it would end after 10 years. During that 10-year period, the city would also be putting in at least $40 million extra to pay down the unfunded liability.
Now, let's make sure we're not counting this 4% 3 times. It's the current 4% plus 4%, or a total of 4%?
It is the current 4% plus 4%. So over that 10-year period, the city would pay at least $40 million above and beyond the ARC to help pay down the unfunded liability. The fund would pay the current 4% plus an additional 4% for that 10-year period. Drop would earn interest at the actual rate of return on the plan with a floor of 3.9% and a cap of 10%. As I said, we would include the $61 million in the other 2 accounts to be transferred to the city for the benefit of the plan. COLA we would end the bifurcation on the COLA, so instead it would just now be a cap of 2% or a cap of 2% with the COLA being the lesser of 2% or the Social Security COLA. But the bifurcation language about age 55 would cease. We would agree to the investment authority, again, with the caveat about hedge funds that we've agreed to. We've already agreed to governance, those different provisions. Term of an agreement would be through September 30th, 2024 on the provisions to which that applies.
I am. I know this is a new proposal, and you can
It's new.
take all the time you want to
No,
look at
we're
it.
not going to take no time.
Okay.
You and I got to leave.
I understand that. We're not doing it now. I can do it.
No. How about if we continue the current 4% and increase it by 2%, which would mean a commitment of 6%, from the base, to the base benefit fund for the period ending September 30th of '24. And increase the, 2024, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I misunderstood, it said 2024.
And increase the drop. I'm willing to come down from the guaranteed 8.4 to a floating rate. How about instead of 3.9, 5. 5 is the floor, 10 is the max.
Go ahead.
And if we do those two things, we can even leave early.
Let me see if I could, I want to make sure, because I was trying to read theirs, and so that we're clear, and I'm asking both of you some things here. 2024 would be the length of the funding obligations, is that correct?
Be 10 years, right?
Okay. Now, I know there's an agreement out there that is longer than that, but this would modify that agreement, and as to these provisions, meaning the funding obligations, it's 2024.
Right, in other words, this agreement would terminate on September 30th, 2024. The current agreement terminates on September 30th, 2030. This agreement would terminate on September 30th, 2024.
Including all the provisions, so you would be shortening the 30-year agreement that is out there. Not going to argue the merits of it, but the argument of the 30 years, 2030, is that correct?
Yes. This agreement would terminate as of September 30th, 2024.
Okay.
This is a inside agreement inside of the current agreement.
I understand. I just want to be clear on my thoughts on this.
No.
You're saying, so I don't want to misunderstand.
Yeah.
You're saying that the agreement, the larger agreement, would terminate at 2024.
Correct.
You're saying that your position would be that the agreement stays in effect, including governance and everything else, and any other provisions that haven't been modified by these amendments, but that the funding levels would end. I'm not saying you agree with this, but I just want to make sure that I understand the difference. You're saying you would agree to a 10-year agreement on funding levels.
Correct.
And your recommendation is that you would transfer the
$100 million.
You would transfer the $100 million, and then after the transfer of the $100 million, you would stay at a 16% for the remainder of the 10 years. You would stay at a 6%, I'm sorry.
6%.
I'm
Until we get,
I'm
I know
incorporating
you're
that.
counting the employees 10.
I was, yes.
Let's talk about the money we're going to be spending.
6%.
6%.
You would stay at 6% for the remainder of the period of the 10 years. So it would be $100 million paid in the method of 61 million up front.
We've already talked
the full
about.
chapter funds for the first 5 years, or whatever it takes to reach 100 million, and then 6% additional money from the board until the expiration date of the 10 years.
6% total money. not
6% total,
addition.
I'm sorry, 6% total, I understood that, for the remaining years between the 100 million and the 2024 year. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
So an additional $2.5 million a year is roughly what we're talking
Something
about.
like that, yeah.
And
the drop interest would
Would
be
be five-
floor of 5 and a
5 and 10.
5 to 10.
And if I could ask this, guys, and I
Six.
recognize the number you came up with 3.9, and I don't know, Joey, if that's you, or that 3.9, was that the task force number at the 100% accuracy, or close to 100% accuracy? 90%, that's what I thought it was, yeah. Okay, I understand. And the one I came up was the one that had 75% accuracy, was a little bit more. Okay. But you're going to want the agreement in its entirety to expire in 2024.
Correct.
Okay. They've made a proposal. You've made a reaction to it. I think we are very close, but I know you have to leave at 5 o'clock.
Correct.
I know I'm leaving as
Same
soon as
time
I
or
finish
before.
telling the court reporter to take this thing off. We are very close. What I would recommend, and Cindy, I know that you and Bob could work on the 9 language pretty quickly.
Oh, sure, I already drafted to send to him.
If you could fire something down to
Sure.
Bob to look at, and Bob you guys could be working on that, so we might have something back in front of us. I will commit to you all that I've blocked out all this time that I've used which you know was the time you gave me. I will find additional time to get back here next week, hopefully Tuesday. I just don't know, I have to cancel some things and get some other coverages, but I will work with you over the weekend and you over the weekend to work on our calendars to get us back to this table. Right now, gentlemen and ladies, I see the only difference now would be length of term. I know your respective positions. For the, whether it's for the contract or the financial, I know that's a difference, but otherwise, I know that you're both now talking about a 10-year funding commitment. You've made a new proposal back at 6, tied to 5 and 10. You've made a COLA proposal. You've not reacted to it, but your position on COLA is you want it unchanged. Is that correct?
Correct.
We're down to those 3 little areas. I want everybody to work hard as they can. We're so close, we cannot leave this thing undone. In the old days, I would make everybody go out to dinner and come back, and we'd work till midnight tonight, but we're not able to do that, and I'm not able to do that for things I couldn't have possibly predicted. My plan was to be here late tonight. But I know, John, you had a commitment too. In fairness, we tried to change them, and because of notice requirements, we can't. I know we have a 24-hour notice requirement, so if we get something noticed Monday morning, we could go as soon as Tuesday morning, if that would work for everybody. But I mean, if it's Monday afternoon, we could go Tuesday afternoon, correct?
We can.
All right, I commit with that, and with that, Madam Court Reporter, show we are off the record and that we are done for the day. Thank you.
We're going to get an update.
Oh, this doesn't need to be on. Could you guys, since you have more sources available, could you guys put together, maybe some of you put together now what we've agreed upon?
They're working on it.
So we have something we can all look at when we
Put a
gather
big
back
draft
next.
on it in case we
The
get it
attorney
wrong.
for both the city and the PFBF, OGC, is working on it.
Put a-
Doing a great job.
See, you guys are already feeling better about these.
We're already feeling good.
All right.